So thank you for joining us today. My name is Dusty Lang. I'm the program manager for the LRBAA. We are wrapping up our second season with our third episode of the season, and we're going to be talking about the Screening at Speed program today and the LRBAA topic for that. So just a little bit of background for folks. The LRBAA at DHS S&T is a BAA. So anybody familiar with a BAA, this is the use of the BAA venue approach. Like any BAA, we are seeking solutions. So the topics that we have out on the long range BAA are not, they don't give you this is what we want you to accomplish. We give you our challenges and we are looking for solutions or approaches to how we may be able to overcome those challenges. It's called the long range BAA because these are even broader and higher level topics than you will typically see in what we tend to call targeted BAA. And the intent is that these are everlasting topics. So they're intended to be things that for which we have an enduring mission need. And the LRBAA is a 5-year announcement. Because they're higher level topics and they're broader, we've developed a 3-step process that can help alleviate some of the lift both from industry and from the government in getting through those initial stages of determining interest. So that 3-step process starts with what we call industry engagement, and it's the submission of a 3-page white paper and a quad chart. So this is low lift. This is not a full proposal. We're not looking for you to go full into a full proposal at the initial step. This gives us in the government side the opportunity to review that and let you know if there's interest, and then we recommend you, if there's interest, to go forward to the second step, which is the virtual pitch. In the virtual pitch, you'll be submitting 12 slides and you'll have an opportunity, you'll have 20 minutes to brief those 12 slides and then some time for interaction with questions from the government side. That allows us to get a little bit more information before we have you then, if there's further interest, go to the third step, which is the written proposal. And we understand that that's a heavy lift from industry, takes a lot of resources in terms of time and labor hours. So we want to make sure that if we're going to that step, we've had the ability to determine there is some level of interest and some likelihood that we'd like to fund this effort. Like I said, that this is a 5-year announcement, but we will refresh the topics annually. So once a year, we will go out and we will look at the topics, and from the internal perspective, we'll say, okay, well, this is an area that we think we have covered, or we have the solutions from previous offers that we think we have our path and our strategy for how we're approaching it. We may take down those topics. We may put up a new topic, and or we may tweak a topic. Whenever we have our annual refreshers, we will go out with our social media and press releases to let industry know. But so just be aware that while there is not a due date for our initial engagement with that 3-page white paper, you can submit that whenever you have something that you want to submit. And then there's a schedule once you've submitted, if there's interest. But also be aware that that topic may or may not be on there for the duration of the LRBAA. So that's just important to know. So as usual, I am going to be joined by some fabulous folks that know way more about screening at speed than I do. So let me introduce the first gentleman that will be joining us today, Carl Harris. So Carl, if you could, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us. If you could tell us, what it is you do at S&T, what your title is, what you do, and a little bit about yourself, that'd be great.
Okay, yeah, my name is Carl Harris, and I'm a project manager within the Screening at Speed program. So I'm involved with a number of different programs and support the overall effort. Basically, that's what I do. I've been at DHS for about 4 years. Prior to that, I was within the Department of Defense for about 25 years, enabling technologies to transition them to our warfighters.
Great. So your expertise is valuable in this area, I'm sure. And then also we have Brian Lewis, who will be joining us as well. Brian, thank you for joining us. Can you also introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Brian Lewis. I'm a technical support contractor from Noblis, providing subject matter expertise to the Screening at Speed team. I've been part of the program for just about 5 years now. My background's in electrical engineering, but I've kind of taken an interest across this program in terms of supporting technology transition and making sure the strategy's there to take these really top-notch technologies and make sure they're effectively transitioned to TSA acquisition and operations.
Great, and I'm sure Carl values that support quite a bit. So Carl, can we start out at a higher level for folks that may or may not be as familiar with DHS as some others, and we want to make sure we're setting the tone. In terms of the DHS mission, how does Screening at Speed support, or what is the operational mission area that Screening at Speed is intended to support?
Well, Screening at Speed, it's actually a very wide-ranging program within S&T and DHS overall. Because we are looking at a macro security approach, it involves a whole bunch of different technologies that kind of work together. And so many of these individual technologies could be used at other parts of DHS. And so it's sort of like a dual use applications for some of these. So that's kind of an advantage of the program, because it's covering kind of a wide range of technologies. Bidders and all might be have the opportunity to apply these things to other parts of DHS. So it's not just a one type of program, but it has applicability elsewhere. The general goal for us is to do next generation capabilities, not just incremental, but bigger solutions, if you will, that will support primarily TSA. Our primary customer, of course, is the Transportation Security Administration, TSA, but also to some of the other DHS stakeholders. And we do have some programs that kind of latch on, if you will. The main goal is to increase the security posture at checkpoints. So we don't want any technologies that are going to reduce that for other things. So we want to increase that security posture so the traveling public feels comfortable. And at the same time, we want to reduce those wait times and improve that passenger experience. So we kind of want our cake and eat it too. I've often heard our team say. And some of those requirements that include, I'm sorry, okay. So some of those requirements include detecting these threats that people sometimes accidentally or go through the systems. We want to pick those up and we want to detect them at the highest levels that TSA is looking for. So they could be organic threats like liquids or gels or that sort of thing, or inorganic threats like guns and knives and that sort of thing. So the goal is to detect them, and at the same time, we want to reduce the number of pat downs and bag searches that often, when the alarms pop up, we want to be able to resolve those alarms quickly. And one other aspect is the term screening at speed that we use. That implies that we want to do these things quickly. So we want to kind of do the detections at the near real time, instead of having to wait and figure things out. So that goes to reducing the passenger timing, if you will. And we also want to reduce the burden on the passenger. They can keep their things in the bags. They can not have to take off their shoes. And the goal is, if we can piece all these technologies together, the passengers can have a seamless kind of process going through without having to stop and start and all that. So that's kind of the long-term vision of what the Screening at Speed program is.
To make everybody on both sides happy.
Basically, that's correct. And
Great.
secure. We feel that, nothing's going to happen.
That's part of being happy, I would think, right? Thank you, Carl. So, Brian, can you help to, I guess, better define, now we, understand sort of DHS mission, make people happy on both sides and feel secure. When we're talking about the Screening at Speed, that's this S&T effort then, and what does that involve more defined, more detailed?
Yeah, so Screening at Speed, ultimately, Carl talked a lot about how this is a really challenging process and how we're going to bring this system of systems together So we're really tackling this challenge as a sort of parallel set of work streams. Some of those work streams are obvious, right? We're going to have better on-person screening systems, better accessible property screening systems. But some are a little bit more forward-leaning that might be a little bit different than what you're used to seeing, at least visibly at the airport. We're really looking closely at developing capabilities in video analytics, distributed sensing, computer networking and system architectures to bring a lot of these systems together as a holistic curb-to-gate screening concept. We're also looking closely at early stage screening technologies that we're not quite sure how we want to use them yet, but could be really, really impactful across the screening process and how we screen people and property. So we've got a lot of different pieces, and at the same time, we're working really hard to try to build the infrastructure to bring those pieces together, as opposed to relying on each piece of technology standalone.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and a lot of work. So definitely a lot going on in there. And so, and I think the part that I think that's interesting, and Carl, maybe you can help to help us understand this, is that I know that, as Brian's saying, you guys already have a lot going on. You have a lot of balls in the air that you're juggling and things going on. How do you see the LRBAA topic that we have out right now as being supportive of all that work that you're doing? How is it that you think this can enhance the screening at speed efforts that you already have going on?
Okay. Well, the screening at speed team, we're pretty proud of all the tools that we've been able to use that the government has that we can use at our disposal to reach out to industry. And a number of these things are the targeted BAA, the broad agency announcements, the SBIR program, that's Small Business Innovative Research, the Silicon Valley Innovation Program, and even other government agencies. We've teamed with the Navy, we've teamed with some others, universities, to reach out. And of course, we have programs with large and small businesses. There's a number of different ways. Where we see the LRBAA fitting in to all of this is it's kind of like a place for all those things we don't know about. What project or what companies are doing today for maybe somebody else that we could perhaps tap into. So it could be what should we be looking at that isn't already represented in our program. So there might be technologies out there that we should include in the program. These could be new types of sensors that we're not aware of, new types of algorithms, or even another agency is, someone is performing work for another agency. So you name it. We can use this LRBAA as a platform to capture those things that we don't know about that we hopefully can use in our programs. So we're excited about bringing these ideas, and we'd like to see how these ideas can help. And the other aspect of this is if we can take these ideas and develop a plan to mature them and transition them. So that's another aspect of this LRBAA that would be very helpful, in transitioning them to our stakeholders. Okay.
So again, still a lot of opportunities and places for folks to fit in. And what I like about what you've said is that we're looking at what we may not already be aware of. And I think that's a great way for the LRBAA to play a role. One of the things that I think is common is we work with our partners. We have folks that we've been working with, some more or less than others, but often in those conversations, we become aware of kind of what they're working on, what things they think might be beneficial. But sometimes there's folks with whom we've not yet partnered, and that can be for a variety of reasons. It could be that what we've put out in terms of solicitations hasn't been something that they felt that in the field or something they could answer to. So this gives an opportunity for them to kind of bring in their ideas. And if they haven't worked with DHS, sometimes they have a totally new perspective, which can be beneficial. one of the tricks though, and the beauty of the LRBA is, you know, that opens that aperture way wider. But then that trick is, if you haven't worked with DHS before, you may not have all the same versed knowledge of what we need, what our requirements are, and the World Wide Web is a huge place. So I was wondering if there's a way that we could help get them started in terms of identifying sources and resources to be able to help them become more informed, so that when they're looking at the topic, they can say, okay, I have an idea and it will fit within what DHS is looking for. Brian, did you have, I think we have a slide that you were going to speak to on this one, and I will tell folks that we're going to there's links in there and some information that we're going to put in the chat. So don't worry about furiously copying stuff down, but if you want to speak to them, Brian, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And we generally love working with new companies who are relatively new in this market, right? We really thrive on that new energy and that new perspective. We don't want to do things always the same way that it's always been done. There's definitely, and I see a large number of familiar faces on the line, at least virtually. So I think it's clear that there's a robust community in this aviation security space. We've been really active as a screening at speed program. So sort of the first link up there is sort of our headlines and a lot of the things that we've done public facing and a lot of the technologies that we've been working on. And that's a great place to start. Kind of in line with some of the areas that Carl spoke to previously, one of our emerging concepts is around either checkpoint automation or passenger self-screening, with the idea that we can take some of the normal processes with security and allow passengers to resolve some of their own issues themselves or move through the process at their own pace. That's a really ambitious process with a lot of pieces coming together. So that's an active area that we've been working. We hosted an industry day about that not too long, well, a little longer ago than it should have been, but COVID, time flies. But we had hosted an industry day, and as part of that industry day, we had robust S&T as well as TSA participation. And the slides around that are really valuable for folks to kind of level set. I also just want to shout out to the Alert Center of Excellence, which is a DHS Center of Excellence through the Office of University Programs that has hosted, I think they're up to 23 workshops related to aviation security. So I've got there's some links there that point to their overarching workshop page, and all things that are presented at that workshop are archived. Just for folks who are new in this area, ADSA 21 was particularly valuable. And there's 3 specific presentations that come from TSA capability managers showing the direction that they see on-person screening, accessible property screening, and alarm resolution kind of capabilities going. And it's in terms of getting familiar with the kind of capabilities that we're looking to develop, we're looking to meet their requirements in this sort of holistic vision. So that's a good place to sort of get some ideas on the kinds of things that we're going to be looking to do.
Great, thank you very much. And as promised, there's links in the chat so folks can copy and don't have to write down furiously and not be able to read it later, which is what always happens to me. So Carl, one of the reoccurring question, and I can understand it from industry perspective and always want to kind of give some perspective from the programs that we're speaking to in terms of the fact that there's no funding limits or thresholds provided on the LRBAA. And I think that there's plenty of ways to speak to it, but can you talk about how industry should view that for the screening at speed program?
Yeah, that's always the tricky aspect to answer, because because we're the government and our budgets vary and from year to year. So we're obviously we rely on our appropriations, and so trying to balance our appropriations with both short-term needs, long-term needs, even mid-term needs for capabilities. It's always a trick. The Screen at Speed program is relatively mature. It's been around for a little while, and there's been a lot of good transitions made already. And so what we've kind of found to work, what we found to work over that period was to kind of take small bites at the apple, if you will. So it's not dissimilar to how the SBIR program works, but it's we'd like to get those ideas and maybe do a smaller part of the program first to better understand the technology of interest, do some limited research, do some limited testing, and that might be on the order of 500,000 or less, something in that kind of range. And I'm describing programs that have generally been successful. Obviously, we've had various programs in various ranges depending on our money over the years. But generally, a good successful proposal or effort would contain like an initial piece and then kind of a plan for the longer haul. That allows us to kind of balance our programs, balance our money, and we can plan for the future. So subsequent phases after, could be as much as $1-2 million if appropriate to accomplish these larger development goals. The Screening at Speed program has leveraged a lot the SBIR program and the SVIP program. So those who are small businesses, I would recommend you look at those programs as well to augment. But of course, the focus here is the LRBAA, and but that goes for there too. Even some of the larger companies, if you can propose something that here's a good idea, and we generally don't really do a lot of the early stage stuff, the real basic research. It's we like to take things that are a little bit further along in development, like TRL3 and further, and try to advance those out. Because again, our goal is to transition to the TSA, and so I would say that probably summarizes how I would answer that question. So hopefully that's useful.
I'm sure it is. And one thing, so next question I have, and perhaps part of what you're talking about here may be able to elaborate on this as well, but further, but broader as well, is when we talked about at the beginning, or I did, that the initial engagement is this 3-page white paper and a quad chart. And the idea again is low lift, be able to get that idea in front of us, see if there's interest, but from the company's perspective or the industry or academia, because the LRBAA is very broad in who can participate, there still needs to be an amount and correct information in there for you to be able to say, yes, I have this interest in pursuing this further. So from that perspective, can you talk about what would be included in a good submission? And as another little piece of that, does it make sense then for companies to, or industry or academia, to potentially say, here's some severable pieces that may be able to be done in sort of a base and an option as we go forward?
Yeah, actually that's a very good statement, and companies are and entities are allowed to bid any aspect they want. So what you just mentioned is a reasonable approach where you take different pieces and all, and it kind of goes with what I said earlier. One of the things we understand is that a solution is not going to check the box right off the bat. So what we encourage offerers, if you will, to provide is an honest assessment of the technology that they're doing, that they're proposing. What is the true assessment of the technology? What does it do well? What might its be ultimate limitations? What space it works in, how it might fit. So in other words, we're looking for the offers to kind of give us thoughts. This is how it's going to be used. Don't assume that we'll read the technology and then figure it out. How it can be applied. So we need that kind of support, if you will. And also, in certain cases, they may need some sort of support from us, the government. So what kind of support might they need? Whether it's some sort of GFE type stuff or just technical support, just SME support, if you will. We do have a very strong team that supports the Screening at Speed program, a very strong technical team. So I would encourage discussions as appropriate to kind of we might be able to assist in there, especially with, we team with TSA. We understand the roadmaps. We actually work with them to develop those roadmaps, so we can help refine concepts and we can explore alternative applications for some of the emerging technologies. And so that's kind of how we can engage, I think.
Yeah, but so folks are aware, they still have to come to the table saying, this is what we're going to deliver. They
Correct.
have to have that capability for that delivery. This isn't something where we can do hey, we're proposing this, maybe kind of. They have to say, this is what we're proposing. And then if there's something like you said, in terms of GFE or information that's needed, then that's something they can call out, so that we can kind of help determine, is that something that is even feasible for us to be able to provide, because there's limitations on what we can do. So yeah, I think that's all important things to document and consider.
Yeah, and I would emphasize, look at the alert program. That's many years of a lot of different technologies. So if you're not familiar with the program already, that's really a good source of figuring out what technologies are of interest and what's been done and where your solution might fit. Talking with some of those university professors, that sort of thing.
I love the what's been done, because then sometimes that saves folks from saying, hey, I have this idea, to find out, oh, that's already been done. Let me figure out why it didn't work, as I think can be important. So thank you. I think one of the things that is important as folks are trying to help us go further is understanding, what does good look like? What does the end result look like? What is an ideal outcome? So Brian, I think that we have again a slide that you were going to speak to that can help folks understand what the ultimate solution, the ultimate goal of the Screening at Speed program is at large.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is, it's worth mentioning that this is a vision. This is an idea on what we think is in the art of the possible, but we pivot on this rapidly, right? It's an ongoing evolution. It's an ongoing conversation. And a lot of that's going to really depend on how the technology development and how the technology maturation comes together over the next number of years. But we think this is really, really possible. Ultimately, our goals are to get technologies into the hands of TSA and other DHS components. This vision shows this really seamless kind of curb to gate vision. And there's a lot of policy. There's a lot of challenges to get to this. And we're not going to be able to, do the status quo, shut down a checkpoint for 3 months, and suddenly it's going to pop back up and be this whole new future. So what we really are looking at is, and this goes back to some of our earlier slides around spiral development. Can we get technologies into the hands of operators now that can then be fit into this larger vision down the road? What we want to do is we want to mature them in a way that TSA can rapidly include them in their test, evaluation, acquisition processes as soon as possible. In general, we generally start at sort of a mature concept phase that Carl kind of alluded to, probably TRL 4-ish or higher. But we really want to get those technologies to about TRL 6 or 7 for when they would transition over. We have a great partnership with TSA's requirements and capabilities analysis team, and are really work to transition to make sure there's a smooth handoff there. But at the same time, this is a really hard problem. In some technologies, this process isn't always the fastest, but we want to make sure that when something does leave our shop, it's a capability that TSA is really looking for and is able to really impact the traveling public. So just a little bit sort of in the specifics of the slide, it's a very privacy-friendly approach. There's not a lot of discussions about identification here. We are looking at distributed sensors. We're looking at attaching those distributed measurements to tie everything together. And then ultimately, the goal would be half of the people or so, when they show up at the checkpoint, we've seen enough that we can clear them straight to their plane. And then the remaining people who we may not have gotten sufficient observations for whatever reason, we're going to do targeted screening with whatever technologies are appropriate to resolve any remaining questions that we have. But the idea is that it's seamless. We're able to focus our resources efficiently. And ultimately, we're able to this gets back to our original have our cake and eat it too. hopefully people get through a lot faster, and we're able to really focus our security resources to make sure that we maximize our ability to keep everyone safe as they fly.
If I could add, we're also looking at speed to decisions as well. So there's a lot of information collected, and there's that aspect of it as well.
Yeah, and I think, you know, a lot of what you've touched on, it touches the surface of what people can probably sort of deduce, is that when you're, like you're saying, if you're taking system and you're taking parts and pieces and have an ultimate vision, I think it's a really good point that was made, that we can't just shut everything down and then pop it back up later. So this is a lot of planning and strategy that has to go into it. And the folks that are coming to us with offers need to understand, again, what this ultimate vision is, so they can see how it would fit into there, not just their piece of what they're trying to solve. So that's definitely challenging. So I'm glad that we have some smart folks like you guys on this.
Well, and to that effect, Dusty, you know, we're highly collaborative with this program, right? If we do select a performer, it's not like we, you know, let the contract and say, come back in a year and give us a thing, right? We're actively working to block and tackle and advise and leverage our own expertise as a team to help put everyone in a position to be able to develop their technology in the best way possible for these requirements.
Fantastic. Yes, because that's certainly part
If
of
I
it.
could make one more point too, is that emerging threats, you know, we want to be able to, we don't want to have to go back to the drawing board to recreate something. So in this vision, we also kind of want the adaptability to be able to address future threats that we don't know about today, but that's another piece of that.
Yes, another big piece. Yes, certainly. All right, well, thank you. So we've covered a lot of information. We definitely are going to be going to Q&A here in a minute, where we'll be able to answer some questions that have been submitted and will be submitted. So, but while you're getting those questions in to our audience, I want to at least let you know how to find the topic. So the visiting the BAA portal, when you go there, the URL is on screen, but again, don't worry about scribbling it down and being able to read it later. We're going to put that in the chat for you. When you get to the link that we have here, you're going to click on funding opportunities, and then make sure on the left of the little screenshot here, you can see a red rectangle. Make sure within there you have checked research area. That's the one says topic area, one says research area. We're looking for the LRBAA topics, which is what we're talking about today. And then under there, select securing aviation. So then it'll look for topic SEC AVN, security aviation 0502 in the results. That's the topic that you're looking for if you think that you might have something that would be helpful for the Screening at Speed program under the LRBAA program. And then there's, you know, some guidance and some things to be able to help get those submissions in. If you are looking for additional information on the process or those sorts of things, the email address for my office, the lrbaa.admin@hq.dhs.gov, will also be put in the chat. So if you have questions or challenges when you get there, we can help answer those. So I think what we want to do now is start looking at some questions that we may be able to answer for some folks. And let me get my glasses because I'm not as young as I used to be. Okay, so for TSA, where does the mission operational space begin for screening at speed applications, technology application? Security checkpoints, X-rays, AITs, or further out. So they gave examples of baggage claim and curbside. Is that something that you can help further clarify?
Yeah, Dusty, that's a really interesting question. And it gets into a lot of policy questions. There's different authorities in terms of, you know, what the airport controls, what state and local governments control, as well as what's the federal responsibility at the checkpoint. And that's going to be an area that's going to be in a place of ongoing interest and ongoing development. But from a screening at speed perspective, we've already, we're working with airport authorities, we're working with state and locals. So even if there's not an explicit federal mandate there, I think there's opportunities for information sharing or collaboration of resources or things like that. So we really feel like as part of screening at speed, that everything's in play for our ability to sort of develop security capabilities to meet the goal. And that's some of the things that we as a program have to do, is do that blocking and tackling and that engagement to make sure that those capabilities are able to be deployed in the future.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. So another one is what considerations in terms of standards or requirements for these solutions they will need to meet, if not immediately, then at least eventually, in order to be able to be a viable solution in the operational environment and missions that they support. And I think that's a really great question, because there's one thing if something works in terms of technology and is a cool advancement, but does it work operationally? So are there some thoughts on that, further information there? Carl, do you have?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think what.
So
Yeah.
I can start with an easy part of it, Carl, and then you can.
Yeah, I
you
was
can-
kind of,
you
yeah,
can
I was
take the
thinking
hard
about them.
part.
Yeah,
right?
okay.
I mean, so a lot of our standards are sensitive or classified, right? And
Right,
we're not going to talk about those today. But at the same time, what's kind of cool about this is I would imagine that the vast majority of the folks who are on this line, maybe not recently, but have spent some time going through airports, right? And when you think about some of the things that are, that are public in terms of what can and can't fly, and what are some of those limits on what travel is, and your own experiences going through the airport, you probably can get kind of close to the sort of things that we're trying to do in terms of keeping things off of planes. It's not the perfect answer, but we also have to balance that sort of need to protect that information. And I will say, for successful offers, we've had a really good luck in the past of working with folks to not make sure that the sensitive aspects of the program hold up the research and development effort. So ability to sort of include sort of parallel challenges or non-sensitive data sets or things that folks need. We work really hard to make sure that, folks aren't sitting around for a year that we could be doing really good R&D because they were waiting for clearances or suitability or other accesses to approvals. Carl, is there anything you wanted to add on top of that?
Well, yeah. The we do have some places to test these things out that you don't have to worry about the security aspects. For example, the Alert Center has a place to test some of these things, and the TSA has some, facilities to do some innovation stuff too. So that's, yeah, I would just add that.
And I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, which is likely, but I think one of the things you mentioned before, and something I've run into, and I know Carl and I both have experience within the Navy, is, when we would be doing efforts, people say, oh, well, just put another, meter or sensor or, indicator up for the Navy pilots. And I think we talked about this as well with these, and you mentioned the speed to decision. And I think that operationally, these are some of the things that folks need to consider, is that we can provide them a massive data dump of information, and that may not be helpful. So some of that I would think is well, Brian, we go through it, we're not also on the other side processing that information. So thinking about how it can be consumed in a way that's actually actionable or beneficial.
Yeah, it is a little tricky though, because some of the information is protected, but a lot of it isn't, and we can make use of.
Okay. So another one is the DHS TSA screening at speed passenger screening only looking at walk-through millimeter wave technology solution instead of other applicable other technology solution available now. So yeah, I would imagine you guys are a little bit more open than that. But
yeah, we're definitely open. Yeah, go ahead, Brian. Yeah, we're definitely open to a number of different ideas and how they applied. So it goes back to the company telling us, how can this apply? How would this work? And as we talked earlier, a lot of people have experience going through airports. So Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Where we need to be able to make sure that folks passing through security don't have threats on them. whether that's a walk through millimeter wave, whether that's a standstill system that is sufficiently good that you're going to be able to make decisions really quickly and get people through. I think everything's on the table for on-person as well as accessible property screening. We'll consider basically any technology, but we need to assess for its ability to ultimately meet the requirements in terms of its ability to detect, its ability to improve the passenger experience, and the ability to ultimately achieve the sort of throughput and operational requirements that we're looking to achieve. So I think basically any technology should be on the table for consideration.
Yeah.
And part of your answer, I think, feeds into this and sort of takes another piece of an earlier question that's more manageable, is how will validation and verification of new technology be achieved? So understanding that, we can't talk about some sensitive things and the fact that, we have to make sure it fits. Ideas on things that have been able to be validated and verified, and how that works is achieved.
Yeah, generally that would be part of a transition plan or some early testing. Some of the programs that we've done really do well when they can show progress along the way. And so, we team with the Transportation Security Laboratory and some other, the TSA has the TSIF. So depending on the situation, we can kind of validate things along the way. So, the best type of program is to kind of have that piecemeal or stepwise program where, okay, this works here, and then go to the next layer or spiral, if you will, and then this works there.
So basically, a plan for them to be able to propose how they would test it and validate it, and then internally we'd have to do a confirmation, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it. Brian, is that a fair way to put that?
Yeah, I mean, we have fantastic teams to help us do test and evaluation. Whether that's formal sort of detection kind of testing that's primarily done by the Transportation Security Lab, and they're phenomenal. Operator evaluations or other sort of testings through the TSA System Integration Facility and the TSA team. We also have the Maryland Test Facility, which is a little more unstructured, or a little bit more opportunities for early stage technologies. We also have a robust partnership with TSA's Innovation Task Force, which is a great opportunity to demonstrate new technologies, to get that sort of feedback back to technology developers early on to help refine those sorts of requirements. So it's really matching sort of the test and evaluation needs with the capability itself. And those are things that we can help, but we definitely would see test and evaluation as a key part of any sort of research and development exercise.
Right. Yeah, Brian, it goes back to what we talk about. We're highly collaborative.
Right. But then again, I just want to put out there, and correct me if I'm wrong, they shouldn't be submitting something saying, hey, we have this thing that you're going to get us into the TSL, right? There's development and some verification from T&E on the part of the performer, and then there's a plan for how that gets into a government resource for collaboration. Great. So I think that is the majority of the questions that have come in. There are a couple that we are not going to be able to get to because of time. So I did want to leave some moments for Brian, Carl, if you guys want to, if there's anything we haven't touched on that you think is valuable to make sure we clarify or sort of answer. Any thoughts for closing out?
I guess I would just reiterate that we're focused on improving the security, and so we don't really, if there's a solution that might speed things up but compromise security, that's not going to fly. So and again, I would emphasize that projects that kind of help demonstrate pieces along the way are good projects, for us to evaluate the technology. And I do want to emphasize there are other avenues for gathering information, as we talked about earlier, the university programs and some of the professors that we've worked with in the past there. Brian, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that folks take away from this conversation that we don't have some very prescriptive this is the exact
Right.
thing that we want. And if you check these 4 boxes, we're gonna be off to the races. What we really want to do is we want to hear, what are the technologies that we should be looking at? How are they going to enable this vision in terms of our ability to improve security and improve the passenger experience? What can it do really well now? What are the areas that either are questions that still need to be answered or improvements that need to be made? And how can we leverage our resources on the federal side to help enable that maturation to occur? And that's really what we want to do, is we want to bring in and sort of drive that maturation conversation and help get those technologies from where they are today to what they ultimately need to be impactful at the airport.
Fantastic. All right. Well, before I do my wrap up, I want to thank you both very much for joining us today, helping to provide some additional information to our partners in industry and academia that can help us get to a better screening at speed program. So to make sure that folks have some other relevant information, if we can pull up, I have a slide where there's as part of another webinar series within the Office of Industry Partnerships here at S&T, the Insight Outreach webinar, we did a finding your way through LRBAA. And so I did a very high level at the beginning of this episode of what the LRBAA process is. If you're interested in more details, I highly recommend, and we'll put the bit.ly in the chat for how to get to that webinar. And then this webinar will be joining, the recording will be joining the catalog of LRBAA Today webinars that are available on our YouTube channel. So you can see there's 5 other webinars that we've done on other LRBAA topics that are out there for your viewing. So if you think one of these other ones may be of interest, you can check those out by going to the bit.ly there, and it will direct you to those videos as well. I want to thank everybody who joined us via webinar today. A great season and wonderful information, and we're looking forward to launching another season 3 next year. So stay tuned. Visit the LRBAA page if you want to sign up for the listserv and or follow us on social media so that you can find out when season 3 launches and hear when our annual refresh happens. Thanks everybody for joining us. Have a great day.